Hey everybody, I'd like to welcome everybody to Tech Tuesday. I'm Jim Bush, one of the support managers here at Datalink and customer support. This is the third installment of Tech Tuesday for 2014, and we're glad you're able to take time out of your schedules to join us. Today's session is going to cover a deeper dive into NetBackup 7.6. If you recall, 2 months ago we introduced 7.6, and we're going to take you a little deeper into it. I'd like to cover a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Throughout the presentation today, Mike Spindler, a Datalink practice director, is going to be answering your questions. He'll take good care of you. He's a Tech Tuesday veteran, and if you recall, he presented the initial NetBackup 7.6. The Q&A transcript from today will be emailed to the attendees. Within a few days after the presentation, we want to make sure we get all the right answers in there for you. The recorded version of this event will be available online after the presentation. Again, that'll probably be a couple of days. If you have any questions after the event's concluded, please feel free to send those to techtuesday@datalink.com, and we'll get those answered. And if you send them early enough, we'll get them included in the transcript. Today's speaker is going to be Mike Morgan. He's a solutions engineer with Datalink. Mike's got 15 years in the IT industry with focus on storage and backup and recovery. If you ever find your way to Brazil and need a Portuguese translator, you want to take Mike along, he can probably help out. But for today and in English, Mike's going to talk to you about NetBackup. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, sir. So I appreciate the intro and welcome everybody to today's Tech Tuesday. Just to go ahead and dive right in, we want to get started here and just kind of do an overview of some of the NetBackup components. Just as a refresh. Not a lot of this has changed with 7.6, but we'll just make sure everybody's on the same page. Starting off, NetBackup has the different components of having the master server, the media server, and different forms of clients. And we see in this slide that there are, even in the media server, that there are different components, whether they're disk based, tape based, or using MSDP for dedupe. To break it down a little further is that with the master server, just to do an overview of that, this is where all the magic happens, as I like to say. Our admin console runs here. Our main, what they call an enterprise media manager, or EMM. Sometimes you may hear that referred to as a database like the EMMDB or MBDB. Also, any kind of infrastructure management. Also, any policies are created here at this level. Scheduling, monitoring is done here as reporting. And as mentioned about the databases, all those are hosted here. And if we are going to kick off any restores, they're mostly going to be done here. There are some cases where we can do a restore from the client side, but most often it's easier to do it from the master server console. Next, just to do a quick review of the master server processes that float out here. A lot of these happen underneath the covers. And what we normally see that on our console is we may see a job starting, and if we look at the detailed status, we can see some of those where it's queuing up a drive or checking to make sure it can communicate. All this is controlled by the daemons, and as we see here on the screen, there are quite a few of those, and they have each individual purpose, whether it's the BPRD as a request daemon. The MBPIM is a pretty neat little daemon in itself, and that you can control, and I have done this recently, if you wanted to stop all backups without having to stop or cancel all your jobs, I shouldn't say cancel all your jobs, but disable all your policies, there are a few different commands that you can throw to MBPIM to either suspend schedule backups, completely terminate all backups, or vice versa, resume your scheduling. BPJobD is the control monitor. Mostly we see that through the activity monitor. Same thing with MBJM. And to continue, the regular or the rest of the processes out here, whether it's BPDBM, MBRB, MBEMM, as I mentioned in the previous slide, Those are kind of the main database underneath the database, as I call it, and also our MB proxy, which is controlled by EMM. Now to jump over on the media server side, there's you can kind of see it as two different kinds of media servers that are available depending on what the function we're doing. In some cases, most often we just call it a media server. Sometimes you may hear it as called a fiber transport media server, FT media server. In any scenario, the main job of the media servers is to control the storage that is attached to it. Sometimes it's attached to it directly, sometimes remotely, but its job is to, whether it's a tape library, disk unit, that is the job of the media servers. The master server passes that control through these media servers. All reads and writes of the main backup data go through the media server. They do not go through the master. Metadata does get it sent up to the master so that can be put in the catalog for restore purposes or just seeing what is all out there, but all the main data is done at the media server level. So these are your workhorses, and they should be built and tuned for that. Preferably, I always like to put multiple gig interfaces, or 10 gig is also an option. And as we mentioned here, that we can have multiple media servers, and they can be load balanced between each other. Just to dive a little further into the media servers, they also have processes that are individual to the actual media servers. Since they control the main process of the tape drives or disk units, we see specific daemons controlling those. And also because they are really the main host talking to the client, we also see this BPCD to handle that communications and make sure that it is able to communicate with the client to send that data. Now to jump into the client side, we also see there can be a couple different scenarios of how we want to handle our clients. That can be in the case where we have, as we mentioned here, a software agent that's installed to protect those servers, and we can have that be a standard client, a SAN client, or a Snapshot client. This is basically where, at this level of the client, is where the data movement engine resides. If we were to do client-side dedup, this is where it's at, is at the client level. Other features that we'll talk about later, things like NetBackup Accelerator, those files that track the individual files in the server are stored here at this level. As well, the encryption and deduplication, as I mentioned, can happen at this level. And again, it is all controlled by the master. And if we do see in this example of this slide, we do see the fiber channel HBA attached on one of these. That is in the case of where we want to have it be a SAN client so that it can talk either directly to tape drives or do even dedup over fiber channel. So multiple options depending on the purpose. To also jump into the client processes, we also see the same BPCD, which is a reciprocal daemon to the media server to do that communications. VNetD is the kind of the, if you want to say, the communication daemon of choice. Back in the day, there used to be lots of different daemons that you had to open up through a firewall. That's all been standardized, usually since NetBackup 7. To go through VNetD, which makes it very nice to handle. Also, when we actually run a backup, we don't see it unless a backup is running, but we would see the BPB car in whether it's a Unix system or a Windows system. So it's something to watch out for. If we're seeing any slowness or any impact on a client, it is something to check for to see if there actually is a backup running. Maybe you don't have access to the NetBackup console to see if it's running, but you actually can see if there is a backup running by just looking for this BPP car process. TAR is also there as part of the restore service. You don't see that too much, but it's essentially the reverse to actually do the restore process. Now, just to take a few minutes, this is a very busy slide, and how I see it is that this also kind of gives us a little bit of a higher level of breaking down the individual things. Some of this we've already talked about of the different components of NetBackup. We see how some of those may be targeted toward the master server, the media servers, and also the clients in some cases. Just to do a quick review, we see that starting in the top left corner, we see that the NetBackup policies are created here, whether any kind of attribute schedules are also on the master. Something we haven't talked about though, which is the storage lifecycle policies in the next one over. So this is a great way to kind of standardize how we're writing our backups to whichever medium, whether it's to disk or to tape or to even, I dare say, staging, and usually staging to disk if we want to do a tape output. We can hierarchically chain these together, doing a backup to one destination and doing duplications to two different other destinations with multiple different retentions. How I found it very helpful in my environment to use SLPs, as they're called, is that instead of having, we'll say in the case of multiple policies, whether they're RMAN policies or Informix or whichever, multiple policies, you can specify that individual direction or direction of where we want to send that back in terms of that media. But if I ever wanted to change that, I would have to change that media. Say if I had a tape environment and now I have disk. Well, now I would have to change that on every single one of those policies or schedules, because you can also change it by the schedule, whether it's your weekly or your differential or your incrementals, to have those go to a different destination. But what I found very helpful is to standardize on a set of SLPs by the retentions. Sometimes you want to divide those up, whether it is your different SLPs by maybe a monthly type backup, a weekly or daily backup. And if you have any special pools, those also need to be in separate SLPs. The reason that's helpful is that if at any time I wanted to change the destination, I only have to change it as the SLP level. And that would immediately be able to affect all the backups and policies to where that SLP is indicated. So it's a great way to do it at a very high level and have that control of where those destinations are going, and also, as I mentioned, the retentions of those. And just to throw in real quick, this mentions about replication. This is also where error is set up, is at the SLP level. And it would be, instead of saying duplications, it would say replication. Just to go over quickly, because we've mentioned it previously, the NetBackup catalog is here. Any kind of media device information, they call the volume or the media database, is stored here. So it knows all about its tapes it owns and where all the images are. Next box over, it mentions about those images as part of that catalog. And then as we move over to the media servers, we see how the parts that the media servers control with, whether it's the volumes, the volume pools, the individual types of media, and also NetBackup Vault. Not to be confused with Enterprise Vault, which is the Enterprise Vault being the products strictly for email archive. NetBackup Vault, and I always like to say either NetBackup or Enterprise Vault instead of just saying Vault, so we know which one we're talking about. Vault's job is to do either duplications, also issue a catalog backup, and handle the eject of those tapes that were written to the eject pool. And it specifies, you can do some pretty cool granularity to say how far, how many days back you want to look, what policies to include as part of the vault, or also any other schedule of retention. A lot of times the SLPs help take care of that nowadays, but it's still helpful for ejecting and getting reports of what media has been sent off-site, especially in terms of tapes. And the last two things of disk pools, we see how those are controlled. We mentioned those as well, and also the storage destinations. Now for a much less busy slide, back to normality, if that's a word. But NetBackup, we see it in multiple different ways in multiple environments. This would be a great scenario of how it would look in a standard environment of a small to medium size, where we'd really just see a master server, and it could also be a combined master media server. The same processes that are on a master are on a media, but if it's split, we don't see the master using those media processes because it's offloaded that to its media servers. But in smaller environments, we can run that as a single point. And then we see our two clients off to the side. Next, to show you what we tend to see in larger environments is that almost the same thing, but now we see it in 3 tiers, where we've separated the master server from our media servers, and of course our clients are there at the bottom too. The reason that we mostly tend to want to do this as part of best practice is that in a very busy environment, the master server is extremely occupied with keeping up of all the metadata, all the jobs that are running, and putting those in its catalog. That can keep, if it was a combined master media server, then it has to take all those extra I/O functions. And we tend to see, and that's why I said in terms of best practices, that we like to split our master and media servers in those larger environments. It creates that redundancy as well to help split the load, and realize that any bottleneck is going to come down to usually CPU, memory, or I/O, and that I/O might be disk-related if we want to also add network. So we are just helping the master server focus on really that CPU and memory of just chugging through that catalog and keeping track of everything without being too much concerned about the physical I/O of the network. Now, the master may need to be on high-performing SanDisk so it can support its catalog and also restore capability in a timely manner. This next example kind of elaborates that third example as well. But in this case, we have two separate master server domains and all their individual components. The thing that unites it, though, is that the OpsCenter in the middle, as we see toward the top here, can see the information from both master servers, all media servers, all jobs, and so it can be that single pane of glass for NetBackup. You can do reporting from both different domains, or even specifying if we want to see data from a particular domain, it's really just a checkbox difference to be able to see that information from that single domain. There are some high-level management capabilities that OpsCenter can do, but if we want to get really to the granularity of like setting up a disk pool, that would be done on the individual master server console. OpsCenter, though, is, as I mentioned, is great for that reporting and looking at the high-level view of what is my percentage of dedupe, what is my overall backup success rate. There's tons of other canned reports in there, as well as availability for custom scripting. Now to jump into some of the VMware integration that is currently known, and also that we see with NetBackup 7.6. Just a quick review. NetBackup has been a long-standing partner with VMware, and including with VADP, or also broke down to the vStorage APIs for data protection, as it stands for. This gives us the ability to see into VMware, create those snapshots, get the backups done, and do it at a high level. And there's multiple different ways that we can do that depending on the scenario. But in a sense, the benefits that we're getting, as we see here on the slide, are that we do get our full incremental backups, the ability to do that in a off-host way. We get the same deduplication. There's some very powerful intelligence policies, or they call them VIPs. I also call it the query method, as we'll see. in a few slides here, and also be able to get granular restore not only of files, but of application objects. Be sure to check the NetBackup compatibility list for the latest on the supported platforms. Most of them are out there, and we'll see some of the examples that are specific to NetBackup 7.6 in the coming slides here. Just a quick overview of the difference between VADP, between Windows, or also we'll say Unix, I don't say non-Windows, but because that's mostly going to be Unix, is that what we see here are the capabilities of mostly everything in here. Whether it's to be able to do a quiescing, we see that on both sides. We see the snapshot on both sides. One of the main differences, though, that we see, and I'll pull up a separate little slide on my side because this is blanking this bottom part out. Okay, that's the same there. So the difference, though, is that what we need is it uses VSS on the Windows side, but we do need to install, if we want to do the quiesce properly on, we'll say, a Linux or Unix, for example, is this Symantec SymQuiesce. That does need to be installed inside the VM so we can get a consistent snapshot of the VM. And always, it's mentioned in also the previous slide, but is always make sure your VM tools are up to date. Those are critical, and they can affect your ability to get proper snapshots done correctly. We mentioned about the last point of be able to get what they call GRT, or Granular Restore Technology, both of file and application objects. That can be in the sense of, like we mentioned, just a normal file and directory, whether a text file or Word doc file, but also the ability to do it at the application level. Currently, as we see with NetBackup, we see that capability with SQL, with SharePoint, and also with Exchange. And think of this as really being able to give you the benefits of a single pass backup. We're just reading that VMDK once, and as it's reading that, we're seeing the individual file marks, and this is where Symantec calls the fancy term V-ray. I don't know, they call it vector ray, but it's kind of like X-ray, but V-ray. And because they call that because they are able to essentially crack open that VMDK, see all the individual files and directories, but in some cases, if and we'll talk about it, of how we can do this of the application state capture, as it's called, of SQL or of SharePoint. We will see that ability to not only hit that, we'll say that MDF file or the LDF file, we can crack that open and then do a consistent state capture of that. On the restore, conversely, now we have 3 different ways to do that restore, whether at the VM level, a normal file and directory level, or even walking the tree for SharePoint, or going on the actual SQL client, bringing up the SQL restore and seeing that backup already there. We also have the ability to put a NetBackup agent inside the VM so we can actually do a directed restore of those files back to the source VM, and also the ability to do redirect recovery is supported too. There are specific supported OSs and applications within the VM. We've covered that a little bit, but be sure to check the compatibility list. Now to dive into NetBackup Accelerator. Think of NetBackup Accelerator, and now it's called NetBackup Accelerator for VMware. NetBackup Accelerator itself has been around since 7.5, and I personally have been looking forward to the time that we could do that at the VM level, but now we can with 7.6. So it's essentially the same type of process, and it leverages just a little bit different from a normal we'll say NetBackup Accelerator, or a standard, we'll say a Windows or a Unix client, because we already have the capability through VMware of change block tracking. Since we already do some of that. It is leveraging that same technology to see the individual files that have changed at the block level in that snapshot and be able to, as we see from the left and going right, merge that into a synthetic full. Synthetic fulls have been around for quite a while, but it's essentially we're adding more and more of the technology through the years to increase our backup speed and make it so that we can take on more and be able to not have the environment as busy, or actually have to be free up time so we can actually put more on it. Instead of it taking days to do backups, we actually can do that in a matter of minutes, or in some cases a few hours. And it is at a media server level where this is created, because the media server is the one where it controls the disk, and it actually writes that synthetic full. Now, something that is brand new, though, also in terms of the what we call VMware Accelerator, is the ability to do NetBackup instant recovery. We see in this case, as we go through the process of how this works, is that we see on the left side of these, and we see these little steps in 1, 2, 3, that we are able to boot that VM directly from the disk backup where we actually stored it. Think of that whether being the MSDP pool or media server dedupe pool. It will come online there. It'll register itself with NetBackup or with vSphere as a read-only data store, and that will show the VM is up and accessible for any type of needs. Obviously, this is not a permanent data store location. It does show up in vSphere as a normal data store, but we don't want to keep it there forever. But we have the capability of doing a storage vMotion, and we can do that live. So we can move that to our standard production vStore. In this whole process, the VM is live and experiences no interruption. If we had a need for recovery, and we see here at the bottom, the VM can be powered off. Any changes are committed to the live copy. They're now in the production data store, and the original backup image of the VM is not altered during this whole process. And so think of this as it doesn't really help in terms of, we'll say, the RPO. This is an RTO, a recovery time objective answer. We are able to, the RPO of it is that we are able to get a restore of the last backup, whether that's a few hours ago, whether 12 hours ago, or so forth. But it's getting that restore available and online in a timely manner. And we can take care of things on the back end of where it resides, but let's at least get the data up and available to our users and application owners. One of the other integrations that NetBackup has had with 7.5 and also now as well with 7.6 is block level incremental backups. The main benefit to this is there's a checkbox in our VMware tab to enable this. When we do that, it tells VMware to be able to do the block incremental backup and turn on, we'll say, change block tracking. So not only do we do it at a full backup level, but we can do it at the incremental level. Now, there are, in the VM, we can see in some of the VMware properties inside vSphere whether CBT is enabled. And that can be enabled or disabled, but at the time of backup, this is what activates that. So if it is disabled, this will enable that. So we can have that effectiveness that we had of the full backup and have those full capabilities to do a block level of that necessary incremental. If we didn't necessarily care about the incremental backups, then we could enable it on the in vSphere on the properties of the VM to have CBT enabled, and then we wouldn't have to enable this, but we still have the same capabilities to have block level at the full backup, but just not at the incremental. Most people like to have incrementals between their fulls, and so this leverages that capability to turn it on automatically. Lastly, let's talk about some of the duplication. And I'll give you kind of a good, better, and a best scenario. So as we see the data coming in, we'll say at the top here in this better scenario, we see it coming in from the vSphere server, hitting our backup host and getting deduped there, and then going to our and we see that the data now being deduped is a lot less than coming from vCenter, and then that's in turn written to the disk pool where it stores our data, and it's only those unique blocks that are stored there. Conversely, if we did server-based dedupe, and we'll specify that, say, media server, to the MSDP pool, the full amount of data is sent, whether it's over SAN or network block device or over the LAN, through both vSphere, the SX host, that backup host, or sometimes it's called the backup proxy, to the NetBackup media server as well. So we can still see all that in there, but we can get dedupe at the multiple levels. Now I'll add one more case where there is a best type of example, and that is at if we did install the agent inside the VM and did a backup in that perspective. Now realize that's not a VADP type backup, but because we're getting as close as we can to the actual VM, if we install the agent there and treated it just like, we'll say, a normal type of physical server, you would actually get a little bit better dedupe there. And it might be, what most people balance it out is that even though it might be a little bit better, what most people like is the ability to have a VM type capability to do a backup and restore, get your file level capabilities well in application, and accept whatever dedupe they get out of that versus just trying to get the best. So that's where, in a good, better, best scenario, sometimes doing the better of still going through VADP, having our backup hosts, and getting our dedupe there, and then storing it on our pool will work. Next is the vCloud director, and I'll be getting into that. And give me just one sec to check something here. Okay. Now, to go into with the integration of vCloud director, think of it very similar to how we interface with vSphere. And what it does is be able to let us do this in multiple environments, get the same capability of our intelligent policies, and it will adapt automatically to any changing environments. So it's really the basis of getting the benefits, but obviously doing it across multiple data centers. So to give a breakdown, I mean, this shows a great example where we may have multiple vSphere environments, whether they are dynamically provisioned and expired by vCloud director. We also see how, as mentioned, the NetBackup's vRay technology can see all those automatically. We see the integration on the top right here with vCloud director, and how the API calls are made to VCD. And then just to wrap up with that, as we mentioned about how the intelligent policies, and we'll see how those look like here in a minute, will handle that. And you do need to use what they call the intelligent policies or the CLOE method to do this, and there are specific attributes to catch on that. We see now in this next slide of what that looks like. And just to review at the top, in case anybody hasn't done this, if we, under the option where you see virtual machine selection, if we select manually, you have the capability to either type it in manually, or you also can browse and put a checkbox next to the VMs that you want to select for VMware. But in this case, and to support VCD, and also this is a note that to support the application state capture, we need to use the VIP or VMware Intelligence Policy type of query. In this example, since we're talking about VCD, vCloud Director, we see the individual fields that we need to select for the VCD org, VCD server, and VCD vApp. And it depends on what we're trying to accomplish as which ones we select. This is some of the policy notes for that. That in case if we want to back up all existing vApp templates, we use the VCD is vApp template keyword in that query builder and set that equal to true. If we want to back up specific vApp templates, we use the VCD vApp keyword in the query builder with the appropriate operating values. And please reference this knowledge base for more details. Now I want to just jump in real quick and just show you some of the views that it would look like with the vSphere plugin, so that we can see almost the same type of information that we'd see in the NetBackup console, but we can let our VMware administrators or different users see that information of our backups, our restores, and where things are being handled. As mentioned already, this is designed for VMware administrators, and I already jumped the gun too in how it shows we see our view of the backup status, we see our restores, and the biggest thing is the familiarity of not having to teach a new view, a new tool to somebody else. This is native, and its familiarity with vSphere, or those who are already familiar with vSphere will get this interface. The general requirements of those is that there is a vSphere plugin to do this. There are credentials, of course, that we need to put in. It is deployed as an OVF. There's no extra software to run on it. We do need to put in a selection, and we see this in the VMware Attribute tab, to say Post Events to vCenter. When those are posted in there, the plugin will be able to capture those. Also, in terms of the recovery, we do need to get the SSL certificate from the master server and have that imported into that vCenter server. This next slide is just a look of kind of a high-level view of what we see in terms, and we see that there's an extra tab toward the top for Symantec NetBackup. We can see an overall success rate. This would almost kind of be what it would look like in NetBackup OpsCenter, or to see some of this high-level reporting of our successful, our failed jobs. Also, we see in terms of any events. And we can break these down. Usually each of these fields are clickable, and we'll expand additional information. We also see the virtual machines by our backup age. This can give us a good view of our environment to see how much of our VMware environment was protected and how long ago was it protected. If we see the majority of our VMs happening over a month ago, then we know immediately that we're not getting recent backups of that, and that should be addressed and escalated. This next section will take us into the intelligent policies a little bit deeper. We see here that the main idea of the intelligent policies, or query method as I call it, is for the automatic protection of VMware VMs. If those who are familiar with Boolean type methods of and or is not, you'll be right as rain with this type of methodology. Whether we can query on the individual, we'll say a data store or cluster or display name. We have multiple fields that we can do this query on and match. We see this little example at the top here of 3 different lines and doing an and between those. What this does is, if we have any matches, and we are able to verify those before the time of backups by clicking in the bottom right-hand corner of this method that says test query, it usually takes about a minute for that query to come back, and it will show you those VMs where this method is enabled. It'll say enabled or disabled. That way you'll know what to expect before your backup happens. A lot of times you want to have if you're going to do this query method, also have this is my personal addendum because I've implemented these and it has saved my bacon many times, is that you also want to have a query that is a catch-all. So if you are dividing up, we'll say for example, maybe a queries and you have multiple policies that you want to back up VMs on a particular data store or a particular cluster, whether that's a pro cluster, dev cluster, or so forth, or data store 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, writing to in 10 different policies. And the reason you would want to do that is to be able to schedule that section, especially if you have a large environment, 1,000 VMs or hundreds of VMs. You don't want them all kicking off at the same time. There are different resource attributes that we'll see in this next slide that we can set, but I personally have divided up my VMware environment by the methodology to automatically discover, but I realize that I can't run these all at the same time due to contention, mostly at the I/O level and also network level. So I've divided my queries into different policies, and it's more art than science. You can design it however you like, but that's what I found works best for me. But I mentioned about a catch-all, and what I did is instead of doing an and in these examples, sometimes I would have an and not, because that not would go to, and I called it like a miscellaneous VMware policy. And I'd watch that occasionally to see if I had VMs land in that policy, and I would see why. Why did they match up to any other queries that I set up previously? Maybe it was a brand new ESX cluster that came online. Maybe it was a brand new data store that came online that I hadn't considered that previously. And I'm at least able to capture those. If I had not done that last bucket of a catch-all, and we'll say an and not type of value, then we would have backups that are not getting protected, or VMs that are not getting protected. We'd be able to see those through that aging from that previous slide, and also through NetBackup OpsCenter has the capability to do reporting on VMs that have not been backed up. But this is a fantastic way to automatically discover, because as we know, whether at the application side or VM side, VMs are always getting spun up, and not everybody tells the backup admin to get it backed up. This is a way we can automatically get that done. But we do need to be smart about it, of how we're doing it and the timings and how many we're doing at one time. I'm going to mention about some of the resources that we want to put on. There is automatic load balancing that happens between the backups. The main types of resources that we want to set are limits to minimize the type of bottleneck. And the two big examples that I've personally dealt with is limitations at the ESX server and also at the data store. This little slide shows kind of elevated amounts. This also depends on the amount of I/O the storage can contend with, or what your environment does. Mostly when there are several different best practice documents that describe what are some of these recommendations and why. Generally, the best practice is to set your data store resource limit to 4, and that affects your SAN-based transport. And then also set your or we'll say vice versa, if you were doing MBD or network block device, or just the simple way of calling it is doing your backups over the LAN, because maybe you don't have a fiber channel connection or any iSCSI type of capability or SAN capability. We'd want to set your ESX servers to actually 1. And there's some pretty cool, as I mentioned, best practices guides out there that explain why. But essentially most people have a farm of ESX hosts, and when it's setting to 1, allows it to be able to spread that load across them all instead of having multiple backups getting up on one ESX host, because realizing that ESX host is also busy with production functionality of keeping the VM actually running, that we don't want to burn it down for the purpose of the backup. Hence, most people like to do off-host backup, which is a SAN-based transport, doing that methodology, so you don't have to go up and down through the ESX stack. In our last few minutes here, I do want to quickly go over some of the Hyper-V integration that is coming with NetBackup 7.6. And just all the bells and whistles going off over here. So for Hyper-V, similar to VMware, we are able to get agentless image level backups. We'll see some of these details of the ability to do file recovery or the Granular recovery, because that can vary, but we at least can get the image level Hyper-V backups. The other key features, as mentioned here, is that we do have that capability to do off-host backup. We do see the consistent protection through VSS. We're able to have a full VM recovery and the file and folder recovery. We're able to get the same data deduplication and have the ability for do and SAN client transport. As always, check the compatibility list for supported platforms. Next is a neat comparison just to show what we are getting. And we similarly saw this for VMware, but there are some important things to pay attention to between the difference between getting agent or image-based backups and agent-based backups. Starting at the image side, is we see the different services, whether the ability to have a VSS Aware OS, the support on that, where we can install that in the host if the VM remains online, the ability to do full virtual machine recovery, file recovery, but at this time there is no application Granular recovery as we have in VMware that can do application recovery of the SQL or SharePoint or Exchange. We don't see that at this time with Hyper-V, though it is on the roadmap. As well, if we were to install a NetBackup client inside the VM, just like we do on VMware, we have that same capability, but obviously because we are doing it at that level, we are not getting the actual virtual machine backup, but we are getting all the individual files and directories as we see from the image-based backup. But the important support is we are actually getting your application Granular recovery by having the agent installed in the Hyper-V VM. Another quick comparison with the agent-based versus image-based that we see here with some of the clients is, and just to refer back, let me go back over to one slide just to clarify. All these capabilities that we saw here were for Windows, and we see those icons throughout. We didn't see that really described here at the bottom, but this is for Windows. The next slide that had a little bit more red and a little bit less capability is for Red Hat or Linux in these type of virtual machines. Where in some cases, it is not for image-based backup. It is not able to keep it online. It is suspended while that backup is running. Because it's suspended though, we're still able to get the VMware and file recovery, and as well, just like Windows, we're not able to get the application. However, we can still protect the environment, and this is where sometimes we need to realize the best tool to accomplish the best job. We still have the full capability, and we see the full support that if we did install an agent inside the VM, we're able to capture all the data that we're hoping to get, including the application level. Now, just to review some of the Granular recovery, we see in these bullet points here is that we have the file system context that are automatically indexed during the backup. We see this the same thing on the VMware side, and we also see it on Hyper-V. We see the recovery of individual files without having to restore the full VM. The agent within the VM enables us to be able to do a direct restore back to the source VM. And just like VMware, we can do redirected recovery, but we do need to pay attention to the supported OSs within that VM. This is a big sticking point between VHD and VHDX, and we'll talk about this now. Just to review, the standard Hyper-V disk type has a maximum of 2 terabytes. For NetBackup support, we have the capability to have agentless host-level backups. and we can have the full virtual machine recovery and granular recovery supported. However, with VHDX, this was introduced with Hyper-V 2012. It gives us a much more capacity, greater capacity in that VM, up to 64 terabytes. For NetBackup support, we have the capability to have agentless host-level backups that are supported for VHDX virtual disks, but it is full virtual machine recovery only. The file level and folder recovery for VHDX is planned for in the upcoming releases of NetBackup. For cluster shared volume configurations, that's also supported as well. We see the example of how that would be set up and where we would have some of these NetBackup clients. As we look at our notes, for Windows Server 2008 R2, 2012, these cluster server or CSV configurations are supported, and they enter redirected access mode during their backup operations. In terms of off-host backups, for that, this is useful, especially when we want to have production Hyper-V hosts operate under a heavy load. Just as we mentioned, why we would do that same thing in VMware to have it go off to the SAN. And also we can combine alternate hosts and media servers to improve that performance of the local backup storage. Also, just to remind everybody in terms of some of the NetBackup support for VMware is that VMware 5.5, and I know we're regressing a little bit to VMware, but VMware 5.5 is available as an EEB or emergency engineering binary if you have 7.601, but it will also be included in the 7.602 release coming out next month. Heading back to Hyper-V, just very similar to that we saw in VMware, we do have the ability to have our client-side deduplication at the host level to our media server dedupe pool, where only the unique blocks are sent over. We do have an agent on the Hyper-V host performing the dedupe this before the transfer, and then and that's the best scenario, or a better scenario as I would say it, or we could do a good scenario if we're using the same client where we'd see the deduplication happening at the media server. And so we're still only saving the small amount of data on our disks, but because we're doing it via the SAN methodology for Hyper-V, that full data is coming off of vCenter, hitting that backup server, but it is getting deduped there, and we're only having to store a very small amount. Usually VMware, we see in the range of at least getting 10x, which is 90% dedupe, but most often you're getting to the 20, which is 95%, or even higher ranges for VMware because it's all the same data usually time and again. So that's a wrap-up of the capabilities of NetBackup 7.6. We've talked about the different environments, whether the review of the master server, media server, and client communication and setups of VMware capabilities, and also of Hyper-V capabilities. And definitely appreciate you guys' time. I think Jim had one more last thing to wrap up, but I definitely appreciate your time.
Thanks a bunch, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time to help us out and go through this for us. Just as a reminder to everybody, you can still send any questions after the event to techtuesday@datalink.com. Also, if we didn't get to your question during the session, it will be included in the transcript with the answer as well. The tentative schedule for upcoming events, April 15th or Tax Day at 2 o'clock Eastern, we're going to have the Cisco Nexus Management Best Practices Tech Tuesday. On May 20th at 2 o'clock Eastern, it'll be a OpsCenter presentation on NetBackup, so you can learn a little bit more about how to make OpsCenter sing for you. And again, thanks everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this event, and we hope to see you again in about another month. Thanks again, everybody.